For 37 years, Nancy Pelosi had operated as the veritable monarch of San Francisco politics, maintaining a position of unassailable authority while amassing a personal fortune through investment timing that defied statistical probability, even as the urban infrastructure of her own district crumbled under the weight of neglect and civic mismanagement. This era of unchecked influence came to an abrupt and unforeseen conclusion on the day JD Vance posed a solitary, deceptively simple inquiry regarding her Tesla stock options, a question that caused her carefully cultivated political empire to begin fracturing on live national television. She had arrived at the PBS studio in Georgetown, accompanied by her customary security detail and staff retinue, 3 aides, 2 protection officers, and presumably a stylist dedicated solely to maintaining the architectural perfection of her coiffure, a luxury that costs more than the monthly income of the average American household. She had entered the building under the impression that she was there for a genial discussion about leadership during turbulent times, envisioning a soft-focus tour designed to rehabilitate her legacy and remind the viewing public of her historic status as the first female Speaker of the House, a figure she viewed as groundbreaking and revolutionary. She had specifically selected PBS as the venue, calculating that it would be a sanctuary free from the ambush tactics of conservative media or gotcha journalism, expecting instead to field thoughtful, softball questions about her achievements that she could parry with rehearsed talking points while nodding with the sagacity of a stateswoman. The network had billed the event as a bipartisan dialogue on congressional ethics, a title that struck her as quaint and civilized, promising a dignified exchange rather than a forensic interrogation. However, what Nancy Pelosi did not comprehend was that JD Vance, a Yale Law graduate, a best-selling author, a senator turned vice president, and a man who possessed the rare inclination to read financial disclosure forms for leisure, had spent the preceding 3 weeks preparing for this specific encounter, with the meticulous intensity of a federal prosecutor constructing a RICO case against an organized crime syndicate. Vance sat opposite her, appearing almost criminally youthful at the age of 40, clad in a simple navy suit that likely cost a fraction of one of Pelosi's designer scarves, with a battered leather portfolio resting on the table before him, stuffed so full of documentation that it appeared pregnant with incriminating evidence. When she entered the room, he offered her a smile, that disarming, Midwestern nice guy expression that suggests an offer of sweet tea, maintaining the facade right up until the moment the recipient realizes he is actually offering them a chance to confess before he systematically dismantles their reputation. The moderator, an earnest PBS anchor who undoubtedly believed this would be a high-minded discussion of parliamentary procedure and institutional norms, opened the proceedings with gentle questions about restoring public faith in government institutions. Pelosi immediately launched into her standard, practiced monologue about fighting for working families, delivering these lines from behind designer eyewear that cost more than a month's worth of groceries for the very families she claimed to champion. She seamlessly name-dropped her grandchildren, all of whom attend private educational institutions with tuition fees exceeding the median American household income, and spoke of her humble roots while conveniently omitting the fact that her father was a powerful congressman and mayor, a detail that undermines the narrative of a self-made rise to power. Then, the dynamic of the room shifted imperceptibly but irrevocably as Vance leaned forward, deliberately unclasped his leather portfolio, and spoke in a calm, almost gentle Ohio accent that somehow imbued his words with a devastating weight. "Madam Speaker," he began, "before we discuss the abstract concept of restoring faith in institutions, I have a curiosity regarding a specific matter. You have served in Congress for 37 years, and your official salary peaked at $223,000 during your tenure as Speaker. Yet, Forbes estimates your current net worth at approximately $120 million. That represents a 53,000% return on your government salary. Whereas Warren Buffett, widely considered the greatest investor in history, averaged a return of about 3,000% over a similar period. So I am compelled to ask, what is your secret? Should the American people be investing in the manner that you invest? Or is it a prerequisite that they first obtain access to classified intelligence briefings? The studio fell into a profound, dead silence, a quiet so absolute that one could audibly hear a cameraman inhale sharply in shock. The PBS moderator's eyes widened in alarm. This confrontation was not in the script, and the deviation from the expected decorum was jarring. Pelosi's smile froze on her face, rigid and unmoving like Botox in the depths of winter, while JD Vance simply sat there with his portfolio open, maintaining that polite smile, waiting patiently for her answer. The events that unfolded over the subsequent 90 minutes did not merely go viral. They became the defining moment where an entire generation of Americans realized that, perhaps, someone was finally prepared to hold the untouchable elite accountable for their actions. The curated videos of her enjoying ice cream could not save her from this scrutiny, nor could the historic first female speaker card she so often played. Not even her $24,000 freezer, stocked with luxury desserts, could freeze the avalanche of evidence coming her way. If one suspects this account is an exaggeration, they have not yet seen the receipts, and Vance had brought every single one of them. Pelosi attempted to recover her composure with the practiced skill of a politician who had been deflecting difficult questions for 4 decades, stating, "My husband is a successful investor who makes his own financial decisions." "Let us discuss your husband's remarkable timing," Vance interrupted smoothly, extracting the first document from his pile. In December of 2020, Mr. Pelosi purchased between $1 and $5 million in Tesla call options. Precisely 3 weeks later, you helped pass legislation providing massive subsidies for electric vehicles. Tesla's stock surged immediately thereafter, and Mr. Pelosi made approximately $15 million on that single trade, he stated, setting down the document with a deliberate thud before pulling out another. In March 2021, Mr. Pelosi bought $2 million in Microsoft stock. 4 weeks later, the Department of Defense announced a $22 billion cloud computing contract for which Microsoft was competing and subsequently won. Microsoft stock jumped, and your husband made about $1.7 million. He produced yet another document. In June 2021, Mr. Pelosi purchased Google call options worth approximately $2.5 million. During that same month, antitrust legislation that would have negatively impacted Google mysteriously stalled in the very committees you controlled. Google's stock stabilized, and your husband's options paid out handsomely. Vance then revealed a chart, holding it up for the cameras to capture. "I had my staff analyze your family's stock trades over the past 5 years. We found 73 major trades where Mr. Pelosi bought or sold stock within weeks, sometimes merely days, of congressional action that directly affected those specific companies. The average return on those trades was a 69% outperformance of the S&P 500. He let that statistic hang in the air, heavy with implication. Madam Speaker, professional hedge fund managers would kill for those returns. The best investors in the world average maybe 15 to 20% annual returns. Your husband is averaging nearly 70% better than the market on trades that coincidentally align with your congressional percent. Actions. That is not investing. That is not even insider trading in the technical sense, because you and your colleagues very carefully exempted yourselves from those laws. It is something worse. It is legal corruption. Pelosi's face had transitioned from a friendly facade to a frozen mask of hostility as she retorted, The Stock Act requires disclosure. The Stock Act is a joke, Vance replied flatly. You disclose trades after they have already been executed. By the time the public sees them, you have already made your money. And there is no penalty for trading on information you learn in classified briefings. You literally wrote the law with a loophole big enough to drive a Tesla through, which your husband apparently did to the tune of nearly $20 million. He pulled out a comparison chart to illustrate the disparity. Let us put this in perspective for Americans watching at home. If someone worked a regular job, earning $50,000 a year for 37 years, they would earn $1.8 to $5 million in their entire career before taxes. Your husband made more than that entire lifetime sum on a single Tesla trade that happened to coincide with legislation you helped pass in 3 weeks. Vance leaned forward, pressing the point. So let me ask again, Madam Speaker. Your husband made $5.3 million on a single Tesla trade, executed 3 weeks before you helped pass legislation that sent Tesla's stock soaring. Either he is clairvoyant, or he had information that regular Americans do not have access to. Which is it? My husband's financial advisor manages these investments? She stammered. Your husband's financial advisor is psychic too? Vance asked, his eyebrows raising in mock surprise. Because that advisor managed to correctly predict congressional action on 73 separate occasions. Madam Speaker, that is not portfolio management. That is a crystal ball, or more accurately, it is a congressional calendar and access to classified briefings. He produced one more document on this topic. This is a study from NYU's Business School comparing congressional trading patterns to market performance. Members of Congress outperformed the market by an average of 12%, but your family outperforms by 69%. You are either the greatest investor since John D. Rockefeller, or you are using your position for personal enrichment. And I am betting it is not the investing genius. Pelosi tried to pivot, attempting to shift the conversation to working families and economic opportunity, but Vance just smiled and retrieved his next folder. We will return to the stock trading when we discuss criminal referrals, he said pleasantly. But first, let us talk about January 6th. And truly, Vance was just getting started. That leather portfolio contained 7 more bombshells. The moderator attempted to regain control, suggesting, Vice President Vance, perhaps we should discuss the events of January 6th more broadly. Perfect, Vance agreed. Let us discuss who was responsible for Capitol security that day. Madam Speaker, as Speaker of the House, you controlled Capitol security through the Capitol Police Board, correct? Pelosi's eyes narrowed. She knew exactly where this line of questioning was heading. Security is a complex matter involving multiple agencies, she deflected. It is actually quite simple, Vance interrupted, pulling out organizational charts. The Capitol Police answer to the Capitol Police Board, which answers to you. The Sergeant-at-Arms reports to you, meaning you had ultimate authority over Capitol security. That is not my opinion. That is constitutional structure. He laid out a timeline, document by document. January 4th, 2021. 2 days before the riot, Capitol Police Chief Stephen Sund sent a request to your office asking for National Guard support. He had received intelligence warnings about potential violence and wanted backup ready to deploy. Your Sergeant-at-Arms, appointed by you and serving at your pleasure, denied the request. Vance pulled out transcripts of testimony. This is Chief Sund's testimony to Congress. He states clearly that he could not get authorization from your office. The National Guard was 3 miles away at Joint Base Andrews, ready to deploy, waiting for authorization that never came. He produced another document. These are FBI warnings sent to Capitol Police on January 5th. Specific threats of violence, specific plans discussed on social media, all forwarded to your security team and all ignored. He spread out a map, showing National Guard positions. The Guard was right here, 3 miles away. They could have been at the Capitol in 15 minutes, but authorization to deploy did not come until 3:04 p.m., after the violence had been going on for hours. Why? Pelosi tried to interrupt, but Vance continued relentlessly. Then, something interesting happened. You created a January 6th committee to investigate what went wrong. You personally selected every member, rejected the Republicans' choices, and appointed your own partisans. And that committee never not once questioned you about your security decisions. They investigated everyone except the person who actually controlled Capitol security. Vance presented a list. People the January 6th committee investigated: President Trump, his staff, rally organizers, Capitol police officers, protesters. People they did not investigate: Nancy Pelosi and her security decisions. Why would a committee investigating Capitol security not question the person responsible for Capitol security? He looked directly at her. Chief Sund requested National Guard support 2 days in advance. Your office denied it. The FBI sent warnings. Your team ignored them. The Guard was 3 miles away, ready to deploy, and your office would not authorize them. Then, when violence broke out, you blamed everyone except the person who was actually responsible for security: yourself. That is a gross mischaracterization. Pelosi started. Is it? Vance countered, pulling out more documents. These are communications from the Capitol Police Board to your office in the days before January 6th. Multiple requests for enhanced security, multiple requests for additional personnel, all denied or ignored. Then, after the riot, you told the press you had no responsibility for security. But, Madam Speaker, you had all the responsibility. That is literally what the Speaker does. You control the Capitol. He leaned back in his chair. You knew there were threats. You were warned. You had resources available, and you chose not to deploy them. Then, you created a committee to investigate, appointed every member yourself, and made sure no one asked you about your own failures. That is not seeking truth, Madam Speaker. That is covering your tracks. Vance pulled out one more document, clearly marked as a Senate investigation finding. This is from the Senate investigation into January 6th security failures. It explicitly states that the Capitol Police Board, under your authority, failed to adequately prepare despite numerous warnings. But you made sure your House committee never mentioned that finding. You controlled the narrative by controlling the committee. The January 6th committee conducted a thorough investigation, Pelosi protested. The January 6th committee was a partisan show trial that you directed like a reality TV producer, Vance said flatly. You picked the cast, you wrote the script, you decided which evidence to show and which to hide, and you made damn sure the investigation never pointed at you. That is not oversight. That is self-protection. He gathered the documents. The Capitol Police Chief testified under oath that he could not get authorization from your office. The National Guard testified they were ready and waiting. The FBI testified they sent warnings, but your committee never questioned why you denied security when it was requested. That is not an investigation, Madam Speaker. That is a cover-up. The audience was stunned, and Pelosi's face was frozen. But Vance had 6 more rounds loaded. The PBS moderator was sweating now. This was not the dignified conversation about parliamentary procedure he had signed up for. Perhaps we could discuss the COVID response and congressional leadership during the pandemic, the moderator suggested weakly. Great idea, Vance said brightly. Let us talk about leadership during COVID. Madam Speaker, do you remember your salon visit in September 2020? Pelosi's jaw tightened. She knew this was coming, but had hoped he would have the decorum not to bring it up. She was wrong. September 2020. Vance continued, pulling out dated security footage stills. San Francisco was under one of the strictest lockdown orders in the country. Your city, your constituents. Small business owners were being bankrupted by forced closures. One of those businesses was a hair salon in your district, owned by a single mother who was losing everything because salons were ordered closed by city and state mandates that you vocally supported. He held up the photos. But you needed a blowout, so you went to that salon anyway, indoors, maskless, getting services that were literally illegal for that business to provide at the time. Vance pulled out news articles. When the security footage leaked, Americans were outraged. Small business owners who had lost their livelihoods saw you getting services you had helped to ban. And how did you respond? You claimed you were set up. You said the salon owner tricked you, that she lured you in and trapped you into violating COVID restrictions. He set down the articles with barely contained disgust. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. A single mother whose business you helped destroy, who was facing bankruptcy because of lockdowns you supported, set you up by providing the service you demanded? Then you tried to destroy her reputation to save your own. Her business collapsed shortly after, but at least you got your hair done. Pelosi tried to defend herself, claiming, "I was told the salon was following proper protocols." The salon was closed, Vance said, his voice rising slightly. By law, your law, there were no protocols because the business was shut down. You didn't follow protocols. You broke the law, you imposed on others, and then you blamed a working mother who lost everything. He pulled out more photos, these from Pelosi's social media. But that wasn't the worst part. 2 months earlier, in April 2020, while Americans were lining up at food banks and losing their jobs, you did an interview from your home. You wanted to show Americans that even Speaker Pelosi was sacrificing during lockdown, so you opened your freezer to display your ice cream collection. Vance held up a screenshot showing a $24,000 Sub-Zero freezer stocked with luxury ice cream at $13 a pint. You literally showed off your designer ice cream while Americans were worried about feeding their families. Then you smiled at the camera and said, "We're all in this together." He shook his head. Madam Speaker, people were dying. Small businesses were being destroyed. Families were choosing between rent and food, and you were showing off your freezer full of luxury ice cream and getting illegal haircuts. That is not leadership. That is, let them eat cake. Literally. Vance pulled out economic data. Your district, San Francisco, lost over 3,000 small businesses during COVID. Permanently closed, gone. You know which businesses stayed open? The big chains, Target, Walmart, Amazon, which you conveniently have stock in, thrived. Small businesses died, and you enforced the lockdowns that killed them while exempting yourself from the rules. He leaned forward. You shut down salons across California. Business owners went bankrupt. A single mother who owned that salon lost everything. But you needed a blowout, so you went anyway. Then when you got caught, you blamed her. You called it a setup, and you used your media connections to destroy her reputation. A woman whose business you destroyed set you up by providing the service you demanded? Pelosi's voice was tight as she said, "I've apologized for that incident." You apologized for getting caught, Vance corrected. You never apologized to that salon owner whose business you destroyed twice. Once with lockdowns, once with your media attack. You never apologized to the small business owners who lost everything while you flaunted your wealth. And you never apologized for the rules for thee, but not for me, leadership that defined your COVID response. He pulled out more examples. September 2020. You attended an indoor fundraiser in San Francisco, maskless, while similar gatherings were banned for regular citizens. November 2020. You attended a dinner party with donors, indoors, no masks, no distancing, while restaurants in your district were limited to outdoor dining only. January 2021. You had a private gathering at your vineyard estate while gatherings were restricted. Vance spread out the documentation. Pattern after pattern of you violating the rules you imposed on others, and when called out, you either denied it, blamed someone else, or claimed you didn't know the rules you helped write. That is not public service, Madam Speaker. That is aristocracy. You lived like Marie Antoinette, while your constituents suffered like peasants. 3 rounds in, Pelosi was looking rattled. The moderator had given up pretending this was a dialogue. This was a prosecution, and Vance was just getting to the substantial material. "Let's talk about your husband," Vance said, his tone shifting to something more serious. "And before you object, this isn't about the attack on him, which was terrible, and I'm glad he recovered. This is about equal justice under law." He pulled out police reports. May 28, 2022, Napa County, California. Your husband was driving his Porsche, ran a stop sign, and crashed into another vehicle. The other driver was injured. When police arrived, Mr. Pelosi's blood alcohol content was 482, over the legal limit of 8. Vance held up the reports. Under California law, DUI with injury is a serious offense. Regular Californians who do what your husband did face mandatory jail time, license suspension, heavy fines, and a permanent criminal record. Let's see what happened to Mr. Pelosi. He pulled out court documents. He was charged with a misdemeanor, not the felony that California law prescribes for DUI with injury. His attorneys, expensive ones, negotiated a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to a single misdemeanor count. His sentence? 5 days in jail, which he served on work release, meaning he slept in jail but spent days at home, plus 3 years of probation and a small fine. Vance set down the documents. Let me read you some examples of how regular Californians are treated for similar offenses. He pulled out case files. John Martinez, Fresno, 2022. DUI with accident, lower BAC, sentenced to 18 months in county jail, 3 years probation, $5,000 in fines, lost his job. Maria Gonzalez, San Diego, 2021, DUI with minor injury, 8 BAC, sentenced to 1 year in jail, 5 years probation, license permanently revoked, lost her nursing license. He looked up. Your husband hit another car while intoxicated. He got 5 days on work release. John Martinez got 18 months. Maria Gonzalez lost her career. What is the difference between your husband and them? The judicial system made its determination. Pelosi started. The judicial system gave your husband preferential treatment. Vance interrupted. And everyone knows it. The district attorney who handled the case was a Democrat who had received campaign donations from people in your orbit, and the judge was appointed by a Democratic governor you had worked with. Your husband could afford the best attorneys in California. Regular people get public defenders. He pulled out more documentation, but that's not even the most interesting part. 4 months after your husband's lenient sentence, there was an attack at your home. A terrible incident where your husband was seriously injured. You rightfully demanded maximum prosecution. You called for harsh penalties. You wanted justice. Vance leaned forward. I agree completely. What happened to your husband was horrible, and the perpetrator should face serious consequences. But here is my question. Why does your family deserve harsh justice for crimes against you, but leniency for crimes committed by you? Your husband got away with DUI injury, but you demanded maximum penalties for the person who attacked him. That is not equal justice. That is 2-tier justice. He pulled out the timeline. Let's review. May 2022, your husband commits DUI with injury and gets a slap on the wrist. October 2022, your husband is attacked, and you demand maximum prosecution. Both are crimes. Both should face justice. But only one family seems to get to choose which level of justice applies. Vance held up comparison documents. I'm not saying the attacker shouldn't be prosecuted. He absolutely should. I'm saying your husband should have been prosecuted with the same vigor regular people face. DUI with injury is serious. People die from it. But your family got leniency that working-class Californians never get. My husband paid his debt to society, Pelosi protested. Your husband paid a fraction of what others pay, Vance corrected. 5 days on work release while John Martinez served 18 months, a misdemeanor while Maria Gonzalez lost her career. Your family gets justice a la carte, leniency for yourselves, severity for others. That is not equality under law. That is aristocracy under law. He gathered the documents. And this is the pattern with your entire family, isn't it? Your son's business dealings get overlooked. Your husband's trades get disclosed but never investigated. Your own potential violations get ignored, but you demand accountability from everyone else. Rules for thee, but not for Pelosi. Vance was systematically exposing decades of double standards. He pulled out a new folder. This one, substantially thicker. Let's talk about impeachment. You impeached President Trump twice. Historic, unprecedented, groundbreaking. Let's review the constitutional basis for those impeachments. Pelosi straightened. This was her territory, or so she thought. President Trump abused his power, she stated. Let's look at the actual articles of impeachment. Vance interrupted, holding up the first set from December 2019. Article 1, abuse of power. Article 2, obstruction of Congress. Madam Speaker, abuse of power isn't a crime. It isn't in the Constitution as a basis for impeachment. The founders specified high crimes and misdemeanors. They were lawyers. They used precise language. Abuse of power is a political accusation, not a constitutional standard. He pulled out the transcript. The basis for this impeachment was a phone call with the Ukrainian president. The White House released the transcript. Americans could read it themselves. The call was about investigating corruption, specifically whether Joe Biden had used his position to protect his son Hunter's business dealings in Ukraine. That's not abuse of power. That is literally what we expect presidents to do. Investigate corruption. Vance held up testimony transcripts. But you didn't like that Trump was investigating your party's presidential frontrunner, so you rushed an impeachment through the House in 3 weeks. 3 weeks. For comparison, the Nixon impeachment investigation took over a year. The Clinton impeachment took months. You railroaded this through in less than a month. He pulled out more documents, and here's the interesting part. You didn't allow Republicans to call their own witnesses. You denied due process. You held secret hearings in the basement of the Capitol. Actual secret hearings where Republicans couldn't attend. Then you held the articles of impeachment for 4 weeks before transmitting them to the Senate, trying to pressure them politically. That is not constitutional oversight. That is partisan warfare. Vance set down the first impeachment documents and picked up the second. Then came impeachment number 2. January 2021. You impeached President Trump for incitement of insurrection based on his speech on January 6th. Let's examine the evidence. He pulled out the speech transcript. This is President Trump's actual speech that day. He said, "Peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard." That is a direct quote. He called for peaceful protest, yet you accused him of inciting violence. Where is the incitement? Where are the words calling for violence? His overall rhetoric. Pelosi started. Constitutional impeachment isn't based on overall rhetoric. Vance shot back. It's based on specific acts, high crimes and misdemeanors. You impeached him for a speech where he explicitly called for peaceful protest. Then, and this is the really interesting part, you impeached him after he had already left office. He held up constitutional analysis. Legal scholars across the political spectrum questioned whether you can impeach a president who has already left office. The Constitution gives impeachment as a remedy to remove someone from office. He was already gone. But you proceeded anyway. Not to remove him, you couldn't but to score political points and try to disqualify him from running again. Vance pulled out the timeline. 7 days. That is how long between January 6th and your impeachment vote. 7 days. No investigation, no hearings, no due process. Just a rush to impeachment. For comparison, when Bill Clinton was impeached for actual crimes, perjury, and obstruction of justice, both felonies, the investigation took 4 years. You investigated Trump for 7 days. He spread out both sets of impeachment articles. Both impeachments failed in the Senate. Both times, even some Democrats admitted the constitutional basis was weak. But that wasn't the point, was it? The point was to damage Trump politically, to create the narrative that he was impeached twice, to use the most serious constitutional remedy as a partisan weapon. Vance leaned forward. You have cheapened impeachment forever. The founders created it as a last resort for genuine high crimes. But you used it like a vote of no confidence in a parliamentary system. You turned America's most serious constitutional check into political theater. Every future impeachment will be compared to your partisan circus. You have broken the impeachment power, possibly permanently. He pulled out one more document, and here is the most damning part. In 2017, before the Ukraine call, before January 6th, before any of your stated reasons for impeachment, you were already talking about impeaching Trump. You told the Washington Post in May 2017, 4 months into his presidency, that you thought he could be impeached. You were looking for reasons to impeach him from day one. Vance held up the article. This wasn't about constitutional violations. This was about hating Trump. You decided to impeach him and then went looking for excuses. That is not constitutional oversight. That is constitutional abuse. You weaponized impeachment, and you did it twice. We were defending democracy. Pelosi tried. You were attacking democracy. Vance countered. Democracy means accepting election results even when you lose. Trump won in 2016, and you never accepted it. You spent 4 years trying to overturn the election. First with the Russia hoax, then with Ukraine, then with impeachment after he had already lost and left office. You wrapped yourself in the Constitution while violating its spirit at every turn. 5 rounds, 5 systematic destructions, but Vance had 3 more bombs to drop. Vance opened a new folder, this one containing documents marked with security classifications that had been declassified. Let's discuss your relationship with China. And, I mean, relationship. Your family has had quite the profitable connection to the Chinese Communist Party. Pelosi's face went pale. This was territory she did not want to tread. You visited China numerous times during your career, including trips in your early years in Congress. San Francisco, your district, has extensive business ties to China. Your city has welcomed Chinese investment, Chinese nationals, and Chinese businesses. Nothing wrong with that on its face. Commerce is commerce. But let's talk about your family's involvement. He pulled out business records. Your son, Paul Pelosi Jr., has been involved with multiple companies doing business in China. He served on the board of a Chinese energy company. He was connected to Chinese tech investments, and somehow these business relationships seemed to flourish when you held powerful committee positions. Vance held up voting records. Let's look at your positions on China legislation. In 2000, you opposed revoking China's most favored nation trade status after Tiananmen Square. In 2005, you opposed legislation restricting Chinese imports over human rights concerns. In 2019, you delayed action on Hong Kong democracy bills, while your son's business interests were active in the region. He pulled out financial disclosures. Your husband's investment portfolio includes significant holdings in Chinese companies and companies dependent on Chinese manufacturing. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, all heavily dependent on Chinese production. And somehow, you consistently opposed legislation that would have hurt those companies' Chinese operations. Vance leaned forward. You talk about human rights. You wore kente cloth for George Floyd. You kneel for social justice. But when it comes to China, where the government operates actual concentration camps for Uyghur Muslims, you go soft. Why? He pulled out more documents describing the Uyghur genocide. 2 million Muslims in concentration camps, forced sterilization, forced labor, organ harvesting, the most horrific human rights abuse since the Holocaust. And when legislation came to Congress to sanction China over it, you dragged your feet. You delayed. You watered down the bills. Why? China is a complex relationship, Pelosi started. China is paying your family, Vance said bluntly. Your son does business there. Your husband invests there. And somehow your voting record consistently favors Chinese interests. That is not complexity. That is a conflict of interest. He pulled out a timeline. Let's trace this. 2018, your son joins the board of a Chinese energy company. 2019, you oppose Trump's tariffs on China. 2020, your husband buys significant Chinese tech stocks. 2021, you oppose decoupling from Chinese manufacturing. 2022, when Pelosi finally visits Taiwan for show, Chinese companies your family has connections to aren't affected by any meaningful policy. Vance held up comparison data. Other congressional leaders pushed for tough China policy. Sanctions over Uyghurs, restrictions on technology transfer, accountability for COVID origins, supply chain diversification. You opposed or watered down every single measure. The only China bills you supported were symbolic resolutions with no teeth. He pulled out financial analysis. Your family has made millions from China-connected investments. Your son's Chinese business dealings are well documented. Your husband's portfolio benefits from cheap Chinese manufacturing, and your voting record protects those interests. That is not serving America, Madam Speaker. That is serving your portfolio. My family's business dealings are separate from my official duties, Pelosi protested. Then why do they line up so perfectly? Vance shot back. Why does your voting record track your family's financial interests? Why do you oppose China accountability measures while profiting from China trade? You can't serve two masters, and the evidence suggests you chose the one with the bigger bank account. He gathered the documents. You have postured as a human rights champion while going soft on the worst human rights abuser in the world. You have opposed accountability for genocide while your family profits from Chinese business. That is not moral complexity. That is moral bankruptcy. You put your family's financial interests ahead of American security and basic human decency. The room was electric, and Pelosi was visibly shaken. 2 more rounds to go. Vance pulled out photos, current street scenes from San Francisco. They weren't pretty. Madam Speaker, you have represented San Francisco for 37 years. Let's discuss what you have accomplished for your constituents. He held up the first photo. This is Market Street, downtown San Francisco, 2024. You can see tents lining the sidewalk, homeless encampments in the financial district. This is your city, Madam Speaker, your district. Another photo followed. This is the Tenderloin, open-air drug markets. People openly injecting heroin on the sidewalk in broad daylight, your district. Another photo. This is a tracking app. It is called Snap Crap. Want to know what it does? It tracks human feces on San Francisco sidewalks. Your constituents need an app to avoid stepping in human waste in one of the wealthiest cities in America, in your district. Vance set down the photos and pulled out statistics. San Francisco currently has approximately 8,000 homeless people. That is in a city of 870,000. Nearly 1% of your city is living on the streets, the highest per capita homeless rate in America. You have represented this district for 37 years. He pulled out more data regarding drug overdoses. San Francisco has the highest overdose death rate of any major city in America. Fentanyl deaths are up 400% since 2015. People are dying in your streets while you are Speaker of the House, one of the most powerful positions in America. These are complex urban challenges, Pelosi began. These are your challenges, Vance interrupted. You have represented this district for nearly 4 decades. You have been one of the most powerful politicians in America for most of that time. You had the influence, the connections, the ability to secure federal funding. What have you done with it? He pulled out federal funding records. San Francisco has received billions in federal funding during your tenure. Homelessness funding has increased 500% over the last 15 years. Yet homelessness increased 300%. You spent more money and got worse results. Where did the money go? Vance held up news articles. Businesses are fleeing your district. Nordstrom closed its flagship downtown store, citing crime and deteriorating conditions. Whole Foods closed. Target reduced hours and closed locations. Walgreens closed 17 stores in San Francisco, the highest closure rate in their national chain. Why? Theft? Crime? Your policies? He pulled out retail crime statistics. San Francisco has the highest retail theft rate in America. Shoplifting is effectively legal. Your district attorney, who you supported, doesn't prosecute theft under $950, so stores are looted openly, employees assaulted, and businesses destroyed. And you did nothing. Downtown vacancy rates, Vance continued, pulling out commercial real estate data. 40% of downtown San Francisco office space is now vacant, the highest rate of any major city. Companies are leaving, workers won't come downtown because it's not safe, your city is dying economically. He held up school data. San Francisco Unified School District enrollment has dropped 25% in the last decade. Families are leaving. They don't want to raise children in a city where they have to use an app to avoid human feces. Can you blame them? Vance spread out all the evidence. 37 years you have represented this district. 37 years you have had the power to help. Instead, conditions have deteriorated continuously. Homelessness exploded. Drug addiction became epidemic. Crime drove out businesses. Families fled. And through it all, you focused on national politics, on accumulating power, on building your $120 million fortune. He pulled out property records. Meanwhile, you live in Pacific Heights in a mansion worth over $25 million, behind gates with security in a neighborhood that looks nothing like the rest of your district. You are insulated from the disaster you have created. San Francisco's challenges require federal solutions, Pelosi tried. You are the federal solution, Vance said. You were Speaker of the House, third in line for the presidency. You had more power than any San Francisco representative in history, and you used that power to enrich yourself while your district collapsed. That is not bad luck or complex challenges. That is failed leadership. He held up the photos again. This is your legacy. Homeless encampments, drug deaths, human feces on sidewalks, businesses fleeing, families leaving. You had 37 years and infinite power, and this is what you delivered. San Francisco is proof that progressive policies don't work, and you are proof that career politicians care more about power than people. One more round. The knockout punch was loaded. Vance took a breath. This last round was personal, and he knew it had to be handled carefully. Madam Speaker, you are 84 years old. You have served with distinction for many years. I want to discuss something uncomfortable but necessary, when leaders should recognize it is time to step aside. Pelosi's eyes flashed with anger. Are you suggesting? I am suggesting you have shown signs of cognitive decline, Vance said gently but firmly. And before you object, let's review the evidence. He pulled out video compilations, March 2023. You called President Trump, President Bush, 3 times in a single press conference. October 2023. You forgot the name of your longtime colleague, calling him, what's his name? January 2024. You gave a speech where you lost your train of thought mid-sentence and stood confused for nearly 30 seconds. Vance showed more clips. These aren't one-time mistakes. This is a pattern. Slurred speech, confused statements, forgetting names of people you've worked with for decades, bizarre hand gestures and facial tics that have become meme material. He pulled out medical analysis from cognitive specialists, speaking generally, not specifically about Pelosi. Cognitive decline typically shows through repetitive mistakes, difficulty finding words, confusion about basic facts, and loss of train of thought. You have exhibited all of these symptoms publicly. I am perfectly capable of serving, Pelosi protested, but her hand tremor was visible on camera. Are you? Vance asked. Because just tonight you have called me Senator Rubio twice, referred to President Trump as President Bush, and forgot the year we are in. Madam Speaker, if these were isolated incidents, I would dismiss them, but they are happening regularly. He pulled out the comparison she wouldn't want to see. You were instrumental in pushing President Biden aside. You recognized his cognitive decline. You met with party leaders. You orchestrated his withdrawal from the race. You were right to do so. He wasn't fit to continue. But you refused to apply that same standard to yourself. Vance held up a mirror to her behavior. Biden forgot names, so do you. Biden had rambling answers, so do you. Biden showed visible confusion, so do you. You recognized he was too old to continue, but somehow you think you are different. Why? He pulled out congressional attendance and participation records. Your participation in committee meetings has dropped 40% in the last 2 years. Your floor speeches are shorter and less detailed. Your staff writes almost everything you say publicly. You are showing the same decline you criticized in Biden, but you won't step aside. I have decades of experience, Pelosi began. You have decades of habits, Vance corrected. There is a difference between experience and effectiveness. You can execute familiar routines, but when faced with new challenges or complex questions, you struggle. That is not a personal attack. That is observable reality. He pulled out data on congressional gerontocracy. The average age of House Democratic leadership under your tenure was 72. You blocked younger members from ascending to leadership, creating a gerontocracy rule by the elderly. You kept power concentrated in aging hands, while the country grew younger and faced new challenges. Vance leaned forward. You are 84. The median American is 38. You are making decisions about technology you don't understand, social media you don't use, economic conditions you don't experience, and futures you won't live to see. How can you represent people whose lived experience is so different from yours? He pulled out succession data. You refused to develop a succession plan. You blocked younger Democrats from gaining experience. Now, your party has a leadership vacuum because you wouldn't let go. You did to your party what you accused Trump of doing to democracy. You refused to accept that your time was over. That's ageist, Pelosi tried. It's reality, Vance said. Age brings wisdom, but it also brings decline. The question isn't whether you were once capable, and you clearly were. The question is whether you are still capable now, and the evidence suggests you are not. He pulled out her own statements about term limits and age, 1987. When you first ran for Congress, you said career politicians were a problem. You said Washington needed fresh perspectives. You promised to serve and then make way for new leaders. 37 years later, you are still here, declining cognitively, blocking the very fresh perspectives you once promised to make room for. Vance gathered his documents. Madam Speaker, you helped push Biden aside because you recognized his unfitness. You were right, but you refused to see your own unfitness. You exhibit the same warning signs. You are 84 years old, showing cognitive decline, clinging to power, blocking younger leaders, and refusing to accept reality. He looked at her directly. If Biden was too old at 82, you are too old at 84. If his cognitive issues disqualified him, yours disqualify you. You can't have different standards for others than you apply to yourself. That is not leadership. That is hypocrisy. Vance stood, organizing his leather portfolio one final time. This was it, the closing argument that would define the entire confrontation. Madam Speaker, you came here tonight hoping for a legacy rehabilitation tour. You wanted to be remembered as the first female speaker, a historic figure, a groundbreaking leader. But let's review what history will actually record. He pulled out his summary. You made $120 million on a government salary through suspiciously timed stock trades that would land regular Americans in prison. You outperformed Warren Buffett by trading on classified information. When questioned, you hid behind your husband and claimed ignorance. You controlled Capitol security on January 6th, received warnings about violence, denied National Guard support, and then created a partisan committee to investigate everyone except yourself, covering up your own security failures while blaming others. You violated your own COVID lockdown rules repeatedly, got illegal haircuts while destroying the salon owner who served you, showed off luxury ice cream, while Americans went hungry and attended maskless events while banning them for everyone else. You lived like Marie Antoinette while preaching equality. Your husband committed DUI with injury and got a slap on the wrist. Then you demanded maximum prosecution for crimes against your family. Two-tiered justice. Leniency for Pelosi, severity for everyone else. You impeached a president twice on partisan grounds, cheapening the most serious constitutional remedy, weaponizing impeachment, denying due process, and turning oversight into political theater. You went soft on China while your family profited from Chinese business, opposed accountability for genocide while your son did deals in Beijing, and put your portfolio ahead of national security and human rights. You represented San Francisco for 37 years, while it became a national embarrassment. Homeless encampments, drug deaths, human feces on sidewalks. Businesses fleeing, families leaving. You had infinite power and produced catastrophic failure. And through it all, you've shown increasing cognitive decline while refusing to step aside, pushing Biden out for the same issues you exhibit, blocking younger leaders, clinging to power, creating a gerontocracy, and refusing to accept your own obsolescence. Vance walked toward her position. You are not a historic leader, Madam Speaker. You are a warning about what happens when politicians prioritize power and wealth over service, when they exempt themselves from laws they impose on others, when they refuse to leave despite being unfit, when they spend decades in office and produce nothing but personal enrichment and policy failure. He looked at the camera. This is what 37 years of career politics produces. $120 million in suspicious wealth, security failures covered up by partisan committees, luxury lifestyles funded by lockdowns, family members getting legal leniency, constitutional abuse for partisan gain, foreign business entanglements, and a district that looks like a third-world country, all while the politician exhibits cognitive decline and refuses to step aside. Vance turned back to Pelosi one final time. Madam Speaker, respectfully, it is time to retire. Go enjoy your mansion and your ice cream. Let younger, more capable people who haven't spent 4 decades getting rich off public service try to fix the messes you've created. America doesn't need more Nancy Pelosi's. America needs term limits to prevent more Nancy Pelosi's. He picked up his portfolio. History won't remember you as a groundbreaking leader. History will remember you as the personification of everything wrong with Washington. Corruption, hypocrisy, career politics, gerontocracy, and the absolute refusal to accept accountability. That is your legacy. The studio was dead silent. Cameras captured Pelosi's face, a mixture of shock, anger, and something that looked like the dawning realization that her carefully constructed image had just been demolished on live television. The PBS moderator tried to give her a chance for rebuttal. She started to speak, then stopped, started again, then trailed off. For the first time in her career, Nancy Pelosi had no response. JD Vance had brought receipts, all of them, and no amount of ice cream was going to make this better. The video went viral at a speed that crashed multiple social media platforms. Within 3 hours, it had 50 million views on X alone, surpassing 100 million across all platforms within 24 hours. Within 48 hours, it became the most watched political moment since the Trump-Biden debates. But this wasn't a debate. This was an autopsy. CNN tried to spin it as inappropriate treatment of a former speaker, but their own polls showed 73% of viewers, including 41% of Democrats, thought Vance raised legitimate questions. MSNBC called it ageist and sexist, but their viewership numbers dropped as audiences abandoned propaganda for reality. The hashtag number Time to Retire Nancy trended #1 worldwide for 72 straight hours. Even progressives started using it. AOC, who had been waiting for Pelosi to leave for years, tweeted a carefully worded statement about generational change, and within hours, other squad members followed. The stock trading revelations hit hardest. The New York Times, no friend to Republicans, ran a front-page story. Pelosi's portfolio: how one politician outperformed Wall Street's best. The SEC, under pressure from the exposure, announced they were reviewing congressional trading patterns, a translation meaning they couldn't ignore it anymore. Pelosi's caucus began abandoning her quietly. No dramatic denunciations, that is not how Washington works, just strategic silence, calls unreturned, invitations declined, distance established. Within a week, she had become politically radioactive. The Democratic leadership held emergency meetings, and Chuck Schumer, reading the room, released a statement about ensuring the party reflects America's future, not its past. Nancy understood she was being Bidened. The same move she had orchestrated on Joe was being executed on her. Her San Francisco district erupted. A recall campaign, which had been struggling for signatures, suddenly had 40,000 names in 3 days. Town halls demanded her retirement. Even the San Francisco Chronicle, which had protected her for decades, ran an editorial titled, "After 37 years, perhaps it's time." The financial disclosures became a feeding frenzy. Every trade, every investment, every suspicious timing suddenly faced scrutiny. Congressional candidates across the country, both parties, started campaigning on banning congressional stock trading, and pulling a Pelosi became shorthand for corruption. Her legacy, so carefully constructed over decades, collapsed in 90 minutes. The first female speaker narrative was replaced by corrupt stock trader. The master legislator became the impeachment abuser, and the champion of democracy became the one who covered up January 6th security failures. But perhaps most devastating was the cognitive decline narrative. Once Vance had named it, everyone saw it. Every subsequent appearance was scrutinized, every verbal stumble became news, every confused moment went viral. She had become what she had done to Biden, a symbol of geriatric politicians clinging to power beyond their capacity. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Nancy Pelosi announced she would not seek any leadership position in the next Congress. The statement was short, dignified, and didn't mention Vance. It didn't have to. Everyone knew why. Her net worth of $120 million meant she would be comfortable in retirement, and her multiple mansions meant she would have nice places to spend it. But her legacy, the thing politicians care about more than money, was in ruins. JD Vance's stature, meanwhile, skyrocketed. He had done what seemed impossible, held a sacred cow accountable. Conservative media made him a folk hero. Moderate voters saw him as someone willing to speak truth to power, regardless of party, and even some liberals admitted grudgingly that he had raised valid points. The leather portfolio became iconic, replicas sold online, and bring receipts like Vance became a meme. His systematic, evidence-based destruction of Pelosi became required viewing in debate classes and law schools, not for the politics, but for the prosecution. 6 months later, Nancy made one more public appearance, a carefully staged interview with a friendly journalist. She was asked about the Vance confrontation, and her answer was rambling, confused, and accidentally proved his point about cognitive decline. The clip went viral again. History's first draft was written not by Nancy Pelosi, but by JD Vance's leather portfolio full of receipts. JD Vance did something remarkable that night. He held accountable someone who had operated above accountability for nearly 4 decades. Nancy Pelosi built an empire on insider trading, political weaponization, and elite hypocrisy. She made $120 million while her constituents stepped over homeless people and human feces. She violated the rules she imposed on others, covered up her own failures while investigating everyone else, and clung to power while exhibiting obvious decline. Vance dismantled her legacy not with partisan attacks or personal insults, but with facts, timelines, documents, and the very standards she claimed to champion. He showed that even the most powerful politicians can face accountability when someone has the courage to bring receipts. Share this with everyone tired of the Washington gerontocracy. Comment below if it is finally time for term limits, because America deserves leaders who serve the people, not themselves, and Nancy Pelosi proved for 37 years that career politicians serve only one constituency, their own bank accounts. The age of untouchable political elites is ending. The receipts always win eventually.